If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today I'm joined by Craig White, a globally renowned men's coach, speaker, and founder of Craig White Mentoring. Craig specializes in helping high-level leaders reclaim their emotional range, develop self-awareness, and lead from the heart. In this episode, we dive into redefining masculinity and explore how emotional mastery, grounded presence, and community support are key to thriving as a modern man. If you've ever wondered how to move beyond survival mode and lead with clarity and connection, this one's for you. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with my good friend, Craig White.
Good to be here, man. Really good to see your face. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
And you're calling in from Cusco, Peru right now, right?
Yeah, I'm just in the Sacred Valley. I'm basing myself here. I've got to go to the UK a couple of times and the States, but
Yeah.
I'm attempting to reside here.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You settling in okay?
Yeah, it's been a goal of mine for a long, long time. I came here in 1999, and I've been a number of times since. And it always feels like home. People think, What is Craig doing moving to Peru? And when they ask me why I'm moving to Peru, all I can say is it feels like home more than anywhere else.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, having been there with you, Craig, I can certainly see you there. So yeah, I'm really thrilled for you.
Cool.
Well, look, I'd love to jump in. You're a prolific men's coach. You work with some of the top coaches and top executives in the world. And it's a hot topic over the last few years, the role of masculinity in society today. We hear a lot about toxic masculinity. We've seen a lot in Hollywood with the abuse scandals. We hear a lot about the patriarchy and all these sorts of forces in society. Can we talk through that a little bit? And how has masculinity risen to this notoriety?
Let's just touch on that word masculinity first of all, because, if you're a man, you have masculinity. If you're a woman, you have masculinity. I think generally the word masculinity is thrown around to as a way to label, if you like, men who generally speaking, tend to have maybe a dominance in masculinity and a less dominance in feminine energy, and women who generally speaking tend to have a more dominant expression of the feminine qualities with a maybe lesser dominant expression of the masculine qualities. It's not correct across the board, but I think generally speaking, that's what we're talking about. I just prefer to talk about men and manhood and what it means today to be a man and what is being asked about us today as men that maybe wasn't asked in the way we lead from 50 years ago. At the core, we're very, very, very similar to women, but there are also some differences, especially in the way our brains function and our hormones function and the way our body's made up and, our energy, the way we express our energy. But whether we are a man or whether we are a woman, we have behind us, a narrative over hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of what a woman should be in society and what a man should be in society. And it's more clouded than ever before, which on one hand is tricky, but on one hand it's beautiful as well.
Right. And those core drivers seem to be relatively consistent over the ages of what are the things that are those pillars for men and core drivers that really prop up our vitality as men.
I mean, I think it's changing, Jeremy. If we rewind 100, 200 years ago, you know, men and women in relationship were very polarized. Women were nurturing and raising, and nurturing the home, raising the children, feeding, all these motherly instincts according to feminine qualities, and men were out there hunting. We were still, we were moving slowly, we were hunting, we were protecting, we were out there fighting, we were protecting the home, we were protecting the women, and it was obviously polarized but complementary, and it had its place in that moment in history. But unfortunately, with that, even though we don't really know when the seeds of patriarchy started, was it religion? Was it the agricultural revolution? Was it that a lot of religions saw God as a man, and men by default wanted to take control and dominate? But the positive of the patriarchy is this masculine order and structure, and rules and regulations and systems and cities and towns, and how that all works together. That's the positives of patriarchy. The negatives are control, divide, conquer, and domination, which
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately we all, men and women, have inherited. But it seems to be that men more than women still have that energy that's moved through thousands of years within us. This
Mm-hmm.
unconscious, consciously, a lot of men that I work with, they want to change. They don't want
Yeah.
to do that anymore. They want to change. They want to enter into the realm. They want to be more relational. They want to learn to be more relational and emotional and connecting. But there's still some unconscious drivers that predispose us to want to dominate, conquer, and divide. But
Yeah.
in my world, with the men that I work with in my sphere, in my little world, it's changing. I see some, including you. I see some incredible men that don't want to lose the capacity to stand up and fight and protect and provide, but realize that there's a lot of wholeness. There's a lot of other facets to our being and our expression that we can step into, that maybe we didn't show growing up because men weren't supposed to show that. Men weren't
Yeah.
supposed to be sensitive and relational and emotional.
Yeah, it really wasn't modeled for us much, was it, growing up? You didn't really see a lot of that, whether it was in the family or whether it was on television or the movies. We didn't really have a lot of those role models.
Yeah, there's not a lot of role models around, you know.
Hmm.
And in many cases, especially where I come from in the north of England, I would say, generally speaking, it's in that part of the world, if not in other parts of the world, but if that in that part of England, I would say that my mother, I was raised by a patriarchal mother,
Mm.
not necessarily a patriarchal father, even though they both kind of bought into that,
Hmm.
tell, control, do it our way, which is from a place of love, but it's still patriarchal. It's
Hmm.
domination. It's do this. It's shaming when we do things wrong, and so on and so on. But my mother was the driving force there, not my father.
Mm. That's interesting.
My father
And what?
was maybe emasculated. My father just was the typical guy. Anything for an easy life. He went to work. He provided. He protected. He came home. He switched the television on. He didn't want to conflict. He didn't want to get into it, any emotional turmoil, and because of that, he was also passive aggressive. But
Hmm.
my mother was the one that raised me to kind of be that stereotypical warrior.
Hmm.
Growing up for me, a man was that stereotypical warrior, and a man connected with other men, and women for me were a mystery. I couldn't be friends with women. I didn't know how to be friends with women. They were a
Hmm.
mystery, and then they became sexualized, and it's only over the last 15, 20 years that I've actually, I guess, reclaimed my own inner woman, if you like,
Hmm.
reclaimed my
Hmm.
own sensitivity and feminine qualities, and I feel a lot more whole than I did 15 years ago.
Hmm. Did you feel growing up like there was a pull there? Like Did you feel that conflict, like something was missing as you were coming up?
Not really, because the first 7 years of our life we download, we don't
Mm-hmm.
ask questions, and then we develop a way of being in the world. We develop a way of behaving in order to receive love. I mean, a lot of the behaviors that we construct moving through childhood and into our teenage years, especially, are fear driven
Mm-hmm.
because we want to receive love. And if we behave in a certain way and we don't receive love, we relegate that to the shadow. We won't do that again. So
Right.
we end up strategically behaving in order to receive love and people pleasing and so on and so on until I got into my teens, and then I kind of tended to rebel against that. Well, what's this about? Who taught me this? These are not my
Right.
rules. I want to create my own rules, and it's the journey of life, isn't it? We need some kind
Right.
of egoic construct to survive, and then we start to ask questions.
You mentioned the shadow there. Can you explain that a little bit? We heard Dr. Keith
Yeah,
Witt on one of our shows talking about this as
yeah.
well.
I used to use the word a lot, especially in my retreats. I stopped using the word because it's confusing for people. I prefer to use the word. I've heard other people talk about the basement. We show a certain expression of our manhood, our humanhood, expression, how we are in the world, how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we behave. And ultimately, it's a drive for love. So if certain facets of our behavior growing up didn't seem to be accepted by the caregivers or the school or the sports team or whatever we were exposed to, we'd it's
Right.
a survival instinct to put it into the basement.
Right.
Or I want, as an example would be, let's say I started going to the gym when I was 11, and my mum loved it. Oh, crazy going to the gym. But I realized that if I danced, if I was expressing myself and I danced, and my mother didn't like that because it was her perception of men don't do that,
Mm.
then I'd put my spontaneous, non-linear, flowing, sensitive part. Sometimes we're shamed as kids for touching our genitals, so we put sexuality into the shadow. Sometimes we're shamed for saying no and being dominant and being maybe having a little bit of anger, so we put anger into the shadow. I was shamed for crying. I couldn't cry. My mum wouldn't let me cry. My older brother used to call me a crybaby. He's 12 years older than me. So I put crying into my shadow and put this tough front on. So
Yeah.
whatever is deemed to be accepted, we tend to show more and more. And what wasn't accepted, we relegate into the shadow, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So in my work, in a nutshell, the quest to be a mature leader as a man is actually becoming whole and realizing that there's potential in that shadow. There's potential in the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that we repressed growing up. If you'd
Right.
have saw me 15 years ago, for example, and you'd put some music on and asked me to dance with other people, my nervous system would have frozen. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
do that. It wasn't allowed. But fast forward 15 years and you ask me to, I mean, I'm going to a dance tonight. Saturday
Right.
night, I'm going to an ecstatic dance. It's just so freeing for me to be in my body now, and having
Yeah.
to be physically training like that for years. And now I can flow, and you know, I've reclaimed some of that hidden potential or that repressed potential. That's just one crude example. So, realizing that as human beings, in order to be whole, no, we do have our capacity to express in many different forms of our archetypal energy. We can be stoic as men, we can be sensitive as men, we can protect and stand up for ourselves as men, we can relax our boundaries of men, we can be aggressive if we need to be, we can be smiling and playful, and just having the courage to reclaim all of that and then feel safe enough in our own bodies that we're not worried about what other people say when we express all these different essences and ways of expressing as men.
That's it's difficult work, isn't it? When you're conditioned from childhood, those sensations in your bodies, they're powerful triggers. And you can see how if they stay in the shadow, if they stay in your blind spots,
Yeah.
how that would shape your behavior going into adulthood, and could create some really skewed dynamics.
Yeah, it is tricky because everything, our body's a record of our past. Everything is remembered, if you like, within our bodies. And what we've not gone into yet, which is a tricky area for men because nobody's ever showed us to do it, is how to be present within intimate relationships.
Mm.
I was, and I know many other men had, because I don't anymore, because I've done the work that was needed. But a lot of men have triggers around mother, for example.
Mm.
We have a fear around mother. We get triggered around mother, and then we either go on the attack, raising the voice, rage, sarcasm, accusations, judgments, flipping it, or we check out. Oh, fucking hell, I'm not going to see my mum again. Every time I'm going to see my mum, I'm triggered, and that shows up within relationships with women. So
Mm-hmm.
a huge area of masculine leadership that is calling us to step into more than ever before is to learn and practice how to be grounded in our bodies, regulated in our nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and connected enough with the other intimate partner in order to feel our triggers when they come up and not deflect them or run away from them. So
Mm-hmm.
I call that, and it's a term I got from another men's coach in the States called Trevor Bohem,
Mm-hmm.
relational presence. We're called to be present in relationships more than ever before, because what men have
Yeah.
done in the past, they've either checked out. I remember my father, anything for my father was, oh, anything for an easy life. That's
Mm.
checking out. That's disassociating. That
Mm-hmm.
that's fear based.
Yeah.
Or at times, I would see him silent, 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 erupt, judgment,
Yeah.
belittling my mother.
Yeah.
So we're called, and women are as well, but women are naturally, because of what's going on in the brain, because their body by biology is sensitive enough, the first menstrual bleed, giving birth, menopause. These are all, if you like, initiations for women to really live more deeply into the sensitivity and the feeling capacity of the body. So
Yeah.
women are more able naturally to emote and talk through emotions as opposed to men. But so we're really, really called to be more grounded and connected and
Mm-hmm.
regulated when we are, if you like, in conflict, or when our body is screaming at us
Yeah.
and going into the past. We need enough awareness to recognize that. Wow, whoa, how old am I here? Let's
Yeah.
just breathe into that. Let's just ground into
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So, relational practices and being in the fire of relationships is tricky for men, but it's a
Yeah.
huge area of development. It's easy for men to go to a mountain and work on the spiritual development and
Yeah.
detach from the known, and connect with the field of energy and feel connected to all things and non-duality and oneness. That's not hard for men, because the masculine is connects with nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard. The hard part is really stepping up. I used to go on long retreats.
Yeah.
I could sit for 10 days in silence and be proud of myself, but I still struggle in the relational domain. So
Yeah.
the relational domain is where it's at, in terms of our
Yeah.
development as men. And that includes
Yeah.
fatherhood as well, and that includes intimate relationships.
I think that's, I mean, everything in life is relationships, right? Again, to reference Keith, we meet with him every week. And I think there's a lot of shame also with men around making mistakes. And this is messy work.
Yeah.
And it is a non-linear development path where you're going to make a lot of progress and then regress, and you'll be triggered and you'll fall back. And I think there's a lot of shame, speaking from my own experience, in that regression sometimes and in the mistakes. I've certainly seen it coming up through my career where I was unconscious of these drivers that were below the surface for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that the encouraging thing here is that these are all skills that we just need to practice.
Mm.
I love that you talk about the age thing, because I literally worked on that last week with Keith.
Mm.
And there I was 7 years old. We
Yeah.
were just talking about something. It's like, okay, where are you? How old are you? And
Yeah.
it was a process of, well, do you feel this old or this old? Closer to
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
old or this old, and really zoomed into like, boom, I'm there.
Yeah. I
An
mean,
amazing,
the other thing to talk about as well is that what is also complementary to this relational area, if you like, is men having men. And I know, if I may ask you a question, I know that you've got a beautiful relationship that you craft and you work on a lot. But I
yeah,
also have heard you say that, the men's group that was crafted
right.
on my program
Hmm.
was also very supportive for you and helped you to relate better. Can you talk about how being in a men's group
Yeah,
helped you to be more present in your relationship?
transformational for me, and I don't think I realized until I was there. Um, Similarly, I grew up in a home with very strong mother, um, and me and Michelle have been together. Just the two of us. My career in sport, we've moved around every few years. So developing a group of friends, you're superficially around a lot of men all day in sport, but it's not an environment where you connect. Talk about those archetypes of strong stoic men. We don't feel, the only emotion you're allowed is anger, and only certain people are allowed anger,
Yeah,
right? So there was a loneliness where I'd almost convince myself that I was an introvert just to protect myself from not, almost
yeah.
convince myself I didn't need that.
I know that one. I can resonate with that for sure.
Yeah. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I love being around people.
Mm.
Same view. I love dancing and nonlinear movement. And it wasn't until that retreat, I think the freedom to be around a group of men and express yourself, to cry, to uh, talk about the the things that were showing up for me,
Yeah,
bringing that back into my relationship and learning how to oscillate between that masculine and feminine side and how to stay present and connect in a relationship.
yeah,
The power of having the support and not being shamed by a group of very strong
yeah,
masculine energy, a group with very strong masculine energy, was
yeah.
incredibly powerful.
Yeah, but the thing with a men's group as well is when you're in and when I say men's group, it could be two of you, it could be three of you, it could be a
Yeah.
friend, it could even be a therapist, a masculine therapist. But when you're allowed to be yourself amongst other men, and you do it regularly, and you express yourself, whether that's through words or something that's been in your body or feeling or movement, but you know, being able to, if you like, empty yourself, it means you go back into the relationship and you've got more chance of being grounded and vertical and centered and connecting in order to be able to cope with any triggers that come up. You're not going into the relationship, projecting motherhood on your partner,
Hmm. Hmm.
or validate me, listen to me, tell me I'm amazing, because your friends have done that for you.
Hmm.
Your male friends have told you how brilliant you are. They've accepted you. They've supported you. They give you a hug. They've
Yeah.
might have kicked your ass, and
Yeah.
then you don't need your mother to do that. You can just be present. You,
Hmm.
you can be authentically more of yourself,
Yeah.
instead of taking everything to your partner, like
Right.
she might also do to you. She needs her women as well.
Yeah. We've again, we had that conversation this week, when I got off the call with our group. It was the first call we'd had in
Yeah,
a little more than a month, and I hadn't realized how powerful that was for me.
yeah,
It slips away a little bit, and then you reconnect, and oh my god, it was really transformational. And I was talking about that with Michelle, the need for us both to have that outlet. Um,
sure. But let's not forget, Jeremy, as well. In a man and woman dynamic, um, women do want to feel us. They want to feel that we have the capacity to validate their emotion. They want to
mhm,
know that we feel safe enough to share our own emotion. But let's not forget, within the DNA of a woman, okay, is this inbuilt need to know that if the shit hits the fan, If somebody burgles your house, if someone invades the village, that you have got the balls to ground yourself, be vertical, get in touch with your warrior, and fucking protect her. So we can't be bringing all our shit into the relationship,
Yeah.
and all every single emotion and getting too much into our feminine. That's where men's work is so fantastic. You bring it all to your guys, and then you go home and you can be present. You can be present, because if we're collapsing all the time and we don't have that masculine structure around our
Yeah.
woman, she's not going to trust us.
Yeah, I think that's the other side of the retreat, getting into that. That's, you told us the king energy, where you're grounded in yourself, tall, your posture, how your energy is being handled.
Mm.
Um, I think that was a noticeable change when I came home. Really
Yeah,
noticeable.
yeah.
Yeah,
And and we touched previously on about crying, and
yeah,
let's not skirt around that. And to be honest, it's not a message that it's not a message that is going to bring men onto my programs, and I don't talk
hmm,
about it a lot. But in my experience working with men and seeing men and my own life as a man, we have so much repressed grief
hmm,
in our lungs, in our chest that covers our heart. And for me, generalization, in most of the men, if not all of the men that work with me, we all need a fucking good cry
hmm,
because we've held on to it for years and years and years and years and years. And when it comes out, we're crying for our dads, we're crying for our granddads, we're crying for our great granddads and all the men that, because they couldn't. And on
hmm,
the end of grief, it's fucking terrifying, but on the end of grief is relief.
hmm.
And our hearts open.
Yeah,
In order for a man to open his heart and shift from living in these survival energy centers of sexualization, greed, fear, anxiety, we've got to cry. We've got to cry.
yeah,
We've got to grieve. However we choose to do that, and then all of a sudden, our consciousness moves up it more into the heart center, and
yeah.
then it's like, oh wow, feel what it feels like to be in my heart. When people have said that before, I didn't know what it feels like. So unfortunately, we've got to fucking cry.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we'll just be angry all our life because anger covers over grief.
yeah.
Men are not angry. Men are full of grief.
Started out on this work not looking for joy all the time. I started out looking for range.
Mm,
I'd regulated myself into such a narrow bandwidth that I wasn't feeling the top or the bottom.
yeah,
And I wanted to expand my range so that I could go into really celebrating and feeling joy and happiness, but also I could go into deep grief.
yeah,
And I didn't have access to either one of them
yeah.
before I started this
I,
work.
I love that word, mate. It's a word that was coined by John Wineland, who's a relationship coach and a men's coach. I love that. And it's a key component of my work to help men as leaders to have more range of expression.
Hmm.
And I'm going to talk about that. I'm just about to start to write a book called Redefining Male Leadership. One of the best quotes I know of that I say to all my clients is, look, most of my clients work with teams. They're leaders of teams. And it's like whether that's a family, fatherhood, or corporate or sports. And one of the things I say to them, look, they can't be what they can't see. So if you want as a leader, if you want your team to sometimes be stoic and close out the noise and be task focused, you've got to show them that. If you want them to sometimes be playful and connected and not take things too seriously, you've got to show them that. If you want them to embrace each other more and use touch as a way to connect each other, you've got to show that. If you want them to be vulnerable, you've got to show vulnerability. You've got to show all parts of yourself. For me, as a
Hmm.
leader, if that's what you want. And you've got to be so comfortable in your own skin and your own body that that fear doesn't sabotage you, and you can just be yourself and be
Hmm.
authentic. And then they have a chance, because they might have not seen that in the father. They might have not seen that in their uncles, in the school teachers, in the PE teachers.
Hmm.
So it's such an important responsibility, whether you're a
Yeah.
father or a leader, to do your own work, because not only kids, we all download from watching others.
I think that's so powerful, and I can see it as I've gone through, and I think back through my career, I can see those men who were completely unconscious and just driven by their sensations, their emotions, and very volatile. The lack of consistency was really difficult.
Uh-huh.
And I think that really adjusted, centered leader can
Yeah.
not only model the range of emotions, but also the appropriate situations for them.
Yeah.
You know, over here we're stoic and serious. Over here we're more playful and relaxed.
Yeah.
And it's okay to oscillate between them, because what I'd find is in the off season, you'd have people who would present one way, and then they'd show up for camp, and you'd continue,
Mm.
and boom, it was not a safe space to be,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
so it was very different how you had to relax. So you couldn't really come down into that
Yeah.
playfulness at any point. You had to, be on your guard.
Yeah. It's only now in my 50s, because I never used to understand it growing up. Growing up in sport, Jeremy, like you, I used to always think, well, they've got the best team. Why are they not winning? I never used to think, well, I never used to understand the influence that a head CEO or head coach had on a team. I just didn't
Right,
understand it. I used to think, well, you got the best players, you should win. It's not like
right.
that. Um, One of my clients is the head coach of Wigan Rugby League. His name's Matty
Hmm.
P, and I see quite clearly, wow, the influence he has on everybody underneath him. It's just
Mm.
incredible, because he knows who he is. He knows how he leads. He knows what his talents are. He expresses that, and he doesn't worry about everything else. Everything
Hmm.
else, he just manages around that. He's just himself,
Right.
because we all lead slightly differently, and that's another big part of my work, to help men to uncover how they lead. Some men lead quite well with a strategic brain.
Hmm.
Some men lead quite well with an influential brain. They can influence change. Some men lead quite well. They look at leadership through the filters of people and relationships. And some men are just really good executors. They're good at getting shit done. And it's important
Hmm.
to make sure that men understand the uniqueness.
Yeah.
Otherwise, which is, um, for me, a potential epidemic that we've seen over the last 30 years, is the comparison syndrome,
Mm.
where
Hmm.
men compare themselves to others, especially on social media. Why don't I lead like that? I should lead like
Yeah.
that. That's a sign of a lack of self-awareness.
Right. And maybe a lack of self-confidence as well. Again, I'll use myself as an example of, I see traits that maybe I don't feel as comfortable expressing,
Mm.
and think, God, I'm completely lacking
Mm.
because I don't have that.
Yeah.
And so I think that people try and, again, you try and model what you see, and if you're lacking in something, and is that a part of your coaching process where if I'm strong here, we'll try and build up these other areas and make me more balanced? Like, how do you approach that with men?
I have a few. Some of it's intuitive, but I have a few models that I use. No, I use John D. Martinez values determination, which is
Mm.
a simple 13-question assessment online. I'm trained in that, so I understand the whole background of it and how we seek purpose in life, and how our values are shaped based on our life history. And so I use that to help clients to know the top 5 drivers in life, which I call the kingdom, to
Hmm.
nurture and prioritize, which is a big piece of self-awareness. I'm also accredited, and I also use the Clifton Strengths assessment with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
They look at 4 domains of leadership. They look at 34 talents within those 4 domains, and it's a psychometric test. And then I help my clients to break down the top 12, and it's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating
Mm-hmm.
how 2 leaders can lead in very different ways. So I help my clients with that. And in and around that, you know, once a client knows who he is, he knows his history. I also do a life inventory with all my clients, which is a big piece of work, looking at life in 7-year blocks. So life inventory, drivers, strengths and talents. And then they have a sense of deep self-awareness, and they can go and they can express. In and around that is generally managing around relational stuff,
Mm.
you know?
That that's really important, I think, to emphasize here is that you've talked about a lot of different models, and you've talked about a lot of different techniques you use to guide men through what is ultimately self-awareness.
For sure.
I think we can't emphasize strongly enough that that is the foundation of leadership, is being aware of yourself, your
Yeah.
emotions, your reactions, and how you're presenting in the world.
Well, that is going to be in my book. The redefinition of male power is not, oh, I'm superior, so I can control, conquer, and divide. The new definition of male power is, boom, I know who I am. I
Mm,
know what I've been through in my life. I know what's shaped me. Because I've done my work. I'm grateful for it all. I've got immense energy that I've pulled from my past. I've pulled from my pain. I've pulled from my pleasure. I feel the energy. I've also crafted enough mindfulness presence to be grounded and connected. You know, I know what drives me. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. That is power.
mm-hmm,
That's real power, you know.
mm-hmm.
And we talk about, if in archetypal work, king energy, you
Yeah,
know, unfortunately, when we say the word king, it brings up a lot of shit, doesn't it? All the movies that we've
yeah,
watched, and wars, and domination, and manipulation. And real king energy is that knowing who we are and how we
mm-hmm.
express, and who we are not. And don't try to be something that we're not. Just express who we are.
Yeah. I just love that. I think, to think about mastery of yourself, your own internal kingdom.
Yeah.
I, as I look back over time, the really strong leaders, the ones you really respect, and you felt the power and presence was the ones that were just so comfortable in themselves.
Yeah.
I think about our GM we had at the Maple Leafs. He wasn't a big man in stature, but when he entered a room, you felt it.
Yeah.
He carried a weight with him
Yeah.
that was, it was a power that was unspoken. We're talking about Lou Lamoriello. He was in the Hall of Fame 20 years before he ever came to Toronto. So he'd been in the league for decades, and
Right.
you just felt that experience coming with him. You knew he had a plan. You knew he'd seen it before. He never lost his temper. He was,
Yeah.
and you were always worried that he would. So I
I
feel
mean,
that.
even losing temper, right? So one of the therapists who I've worked with a lot, and I've been trained by him, is Dr. Robert Masters,
Mm,
who's now 77. He's done a lot of work in the men's workspace, and even losing our temper, i.e., getting angry, is allowed if we have practiced staying grounded and connected and loving and present with our anger. Because there's a big difference, Jeremy, between an ungrounded, disconnected man who's lost in his head, who comes home from work, who gets pissed off and says, oh, fuck that, goes on the attack or closes the door and checks out, versus a man who's come home from work, he's turned the key off in his car, he grounds himself, he connects with his heart, he's open to whatever faces him when he goes through the door. He opens the door, his missus and his kids are going crazy. There's a bit of conflict, but he's so grounded and safe in his body. Okay, maybe his missus says something that pisses him off, that maybe confronts one of his boundaries, and he has enough courage to say, ground, breathing, vertical, soft, okay? Love, do you mind if I say something right now? What you just said, do you remember when you said that? That is not acceptable. I will not accept that. Now, that is anger combined with groundedness, connectivity, regulation, penetration, and nobody's taught us that, have they? We express anger like little boys and little girls, don't we?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. I think that's one of the things that I think is really challenging. It is growing up when we lose our temper and we get angry. We're just told to stop it. We're not taught how to
yeah,
appropriately express that. And so a lot of that will be internalized and turn into shame and depression and all these other
yeah.
traits that may have been more acceptable.
Mm.
So talk us through that process. You mentioned a little bit about the grounding and being grounded before you go in. What is that trigger going to feel like for a man? Because a lot of people might be unconscious of that,
Yeah.
and it just happens. What are people feeling in their body, and how do they
Well,
move
that
through
is
that?
the challenge, the unconsciousness of it, the lack of awareness, and I'll go back to like those examples again. When we're ungrounded, what that generally means is we're just in the story. We're lost in the narrative. Our attention, our intention, which is that desire to be a certain way, our intention and where we place our attention is gold. It's a big part of my work. It's the most important part of any self-development work if we want to transform and change behaviors is where we put our attention. So imagine guy number one. He's had a bit of a stressful day at work, right? He's in his head. He's replaying stuff. He's had a bit of a conflict with one of his employees. Unconsciously, she reminds him of his mum when he grew up, and he's just past, present, future, present, future, present, future. Past, present, future. He's just lost in past and future, and he's in a narrative. It shouldn't have happened. Why did I do that? Why did she do that? And so on and so on. So his body is responding to all that. He doesn't know. He's got a lack of awareness. He's probably stiffing his jaw. He's probably breathing in. He's rounded. He's grinding his teeth unconsciously. He goes home. He's already expecting that there's going to be shit in the house because he's uncertain of how his wife is going to be when he opens the door. So he's already creating a story of what's going to happen. He's manifesting his future, by the way his body is, by where his attention is, right? And don't be surprised if there's a bit of a conflict, he has an argument, he checks out, he says something he shouldn't have said, and it goes even deeper. He goes even deeper into turmoil in the prison of the mind. You get another guy, let's say he's worked with me because we do a lot of these practices, and I also have a
Mm-hmm.
meditation library to guide men through some of these. In fact, one of my meditations that I've just recorded is actually called Coming Home, and it's
Right.
designed for men to turn off the engine, put on the meditation. It's about 12 minutes, and in that 12 minutes, they bring their attention into the body. They take their attention away from the story in the head. And the first part of that meditation is the attention is on the ground, and our attention wanders, but the practice of meditation is bringing it back. They
Mm.
focus on the ground, they focus on the security of the ground, allowing the ground to support them. And then we breathe up through the spine, which puts them into a vertical posture, okay,
Mm-hmm.
chin in neutral, and we bring our attention to above the head, so that they split their attention between the ground and the spaciousness above the head. And then they shift their attention behind them, which is a metaphor for the past or what's happened in their day. And then they feel their backbone, they feel their strength, they feel their resilience, and then they bring their attention to the front. They soften the face, we soften the heart, we soften the belly. So it's a really strong back, a soft, gentle, open, friendly front grounded, connected to potential. And then we bring our attention finally in the heart and we breathe into the heart. And then a man opens his attention and he develops this attitude of, look, whatever happens when I open this door, I can hold it
Mm-hmm.
because I'm grounded. I'm connected to something greater than me. I can feel my fucking backbone. I've got a soft, gentle face, soft, gentle heart, soft, gentle breath. And I'm breathing in a way that the other person will trust me. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
anxious. And I mean, come on, even just listening to me say that,
Mm-hmm.
there's an insight around, well, that man, whatever happens, the same thing happens, nothing changes. That man isn't going to react in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's a practice. It's a daily practice.
Right.
And then we increase our awareness and we catch it. We catch when we're going into the 7-year-old. We catch our triggers. We
Mm-hmm.
recognize it faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even those unconscious signals of your breath. When you walk into a room and you've got slow, controlled breath, you send a signal of safety
For sure.
that you're in a good place, you're relaxed. The energy that you're emitting totally different.
Especially to women because they can feel a little bit more than we can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It sounds
And
simple, doesn't it? It sounds simple. It sounds
yeah,
too good to be true. The key is practice. Like when people ask
yeah,
me, what do I do? I'm not a therapist. Sometimes I don't resonate as a coach,
yeah.
you know, but I'm someone that takes men on an adventure that involves retraining our thinking, feeling, and behaviors
Mm-hmm.
with a practice. It's like going to the gym.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the important thing. It's not a one time. It's not that you go and do a meditation and all's forgiven. This is a constant practice
Yeah,
that you've got to develop and hone.
yeah.
One of the things as we was coming up on time here, I want to touch on, something that's been quite alarming really, and a lot of publicity is around the male suicide rates.
Mm.
And as we talk through all of these unconscious drivers, these shadow or basement selves, what's driving that with men, and what can we do to help?
I mean, I think it's different for a lot of men, but at the root of it, generally speaking, is I'm not loved. I'm bad. I'm not good enough. I'm shameful. I don't feel safe. No one will get me. No one will understand me. I don't want to ask for help because I don't. Everybody's busy. It's that self abandonment. It's that self
Mm,
rejection. Um, and unfortunately, shame drives a lot of it. You know, the
mm-hmm,
patriarchy drives shame, a feeling that we're bad and we're not good enough, or we're disgusting, or we're dirty, or we're not worthy. Unfortunately, and it's just a checkout.
mm-hmm,
It's a checkout. It's a disconnection. It's if I check out now, everything will be over. I don't want to feel this pain,
mm-hmm.
and it's yeah, it's incredibly sad, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh,
I
it's
think the
devastating.
way personally, we're all doing our bit, but personally, we're not going to change overnight the fact that young men and women, but let's talk about men, young boys come through dysfunctional, disconnected, separated, um, unsafe family systems, right?
Mm,
We can't stop that overnight. That's going to happen. But what we could potentially control is how we educate young men and women in the early years of school.
mm-hmm,
Help them to regulate their own nervous systems, help them to feel ground, help them to connect with each other and love each other, help them to give them a curriculum on the emotions, the wisdom of anger, the wisdom of sadness, the wisdom of grief, the wisdom of anxiety. So they're not afraid of these emotions.
mm-hmm,
We can do something around self-regulation, safety in the body, and emotional intelligence in those early years, which for me could have
Yeah.
a massive, massive, massive impact, But
Hmm.
again, it's not only about the curriculum, it comes back to leadership. Are the
Yeah.
teachers that are teaching this curriculum grounded, safe in their own? So, there's the teachers in these schools have got to go through some kind of process to know how to do that, so that the kids are inspired and the kids can see something different.
Hmm.
So, school for me is a big, big, big it's a big opportunity where we can change the dialogue around,
Yeah.
emotions, suffering, lack of confidence, understanding why their mum and dad might be the way they are, and so on.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that there is that role of men in the home and in the family. That strong father energy.
Yeah,
Can you speak a little bit to that? How men need to show up in the home to teach
yeah,
sons and daughters.
yeah. Again, generally speaking, we're still. It's not changing. We're still in an area of history that within this, if you like, field of men's work is often called the absent father. You know, we're in times of absent fatherhood. That could mean that the father and mother separated, and the mother wouldn't allow the father to see the kids because of safety issues. It could be that um, the mother and father are split, but the kids only see the father occasionally and not enough. It could be that the father was around, but he worked all the time,
Hmm.
or the father is around, but the kid gets sent to boarding school, at the age of 8,
Mm.
or the father was around, but he wasn't modeling safety and emotional awareness and grounded sensitivity. So, I mean, it all really started with the seed of the Industrial Revolution, where men,
Mm.
vroom, they were just working, they were absent, and the little boy didn't have a model of masculinity, and the women had to try and be mother and father in many cases, which is tough for
Hmm.
women. I think at the heart of a woman, she doesn't want to be a dad.
Hmm.
She doesn't want to be the enforcer, but often women have to be because men are not around.
Hmm. Yeah, and then if that's not modeled to you growing up, then going into that relationship,
Mm,
I think you don't know how to bring that into your relationship maybe, and so there's a
yeah.
struggle there.
I mean, the other thing to talk about, which is really another podcast, Jeremy, in the future, is it's not a man or a woman's fault. Um, there's such pressure in today's society on the nuclear family. There's
Mm.
such pressure on mum to be the perfect mum and to be
Hmm.
everything, and for dad to be the perfect dad and to be everything to the child. It wasn't like that in tribal times. It was
Right.
a tribe. The village raised the kids.
Right.
The kid was with the father, and then the neighbor, and then the brother, and the uncle, and the grandfather, and the
Hmm.
father from that family, and we communed, and there were so many models of masculinity, and
Hmm.
it's such. I mean, I'm not a father. I'm not a biological father, but there's so much pressure put on nuclear family mothers and fathers. And one of the suggestions that I have for some of my clients that have kids, young kids, is to find mentors for them.
Hmm.
You know, you don't take all the burden. I used to have a friend in a place where I used to live in England, and uh, once a month, he'd organise for one of his friends to come and take his two boys away, and they'd go missing for 3 days and camping in the woods.
Right.
They had another masculine mentor, so it wasn't all down to the dad.
Right. I love that, Craig. And to touch on your clients a little bit in the journeys, as a positive message here, I've felt my own improvements and my own progress under your mentorship. What are some of the things that people can expect as outcomes going through this work?
Connection, learning not to compete with other men, learning that other men can be safe. You can be safe around other men. I'm talking about my group program here.
Mm-hmm.
The learnings that come from just being with and listening to the experiences, the life experiences of other men, and realizing that, wow, I'm with 20 men here. We've all got a different costume on, and some of us like pickled onion, and some of us like salt and vinegar, and some of us like ready salted. But when we come away from our senses and when we come away from our masks and who we think we are, on the inside, we're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
We've all inherited a certain dialogue. We've all inherited a certain ancestry line of men, and we're all the same. And when we come into our hearts, we're all exactly the same. And when we connect to spirit, if you like, or whatever you want to call it, the field, the quantum field, spirit, consciousness, whatever, when we drop into that, wow, we're all exactly the same. It's powerful. And then another important part of my work is to help men to uncover their uniqueness as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be like him. You don't have to be like him. You can take wisdom from him, and him. But ultimately, you can grow confidence in unraveling your uniqueness as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think on that connectedness piece, one of the things that was quite striking, and I think that other men will get from this, is you're not alone. So much of what drives us, as we talked about, is shame. But once you release that and you talk in that group and you realize that basically every other man in the group has been through the exact same scenario that you've been hiding and covering up,
Yeah,
it there's a relief to it
yeah,
that shame can't exist anymore.
yeah,
And I think that knowing that other men have been through your scenario, other men, you have no idea what other men are going through.
yeah,
It really dispels some of those dialogues that you have in your mind in those relationships where you look at another man and compare yourself and think, he's got it made, he's perfect, this and that and the other. When you actually hear their story,
yeah,
he's no different than you,
yeah,
as you said.
yeah. We all think we're alone. Suicide. We all
Yeah.
think we're alone. We all think our pain is unique. We all, in terms of what happened to us is different. But in
Hmm.
terms of what we feel or what we couldn't feel because we didn't feel safe enough, the feelings that manifest in the body and how they move through us, and how some of them move through freely and some of them it's a little bit tricky. That's very, very similar.
I received a ton of support from Michelle. She supported me throughout our 20-year marriage. How can women best support men going through this process to become a better adjusted version of themselves?
That's a brilliant question. I think it's a team effort. I think there has to be an intention from the man and the woman to be
Yeah.
in relationship, moving through relationship. I think it's useful for men and women to have separate groups,
Hmm.
a woman's friendship group or a man's group where they can offload, be
Yeah.
heard, be validated. I also think that it's important for a woman to do her own somatic work in
Hmm.
order to learn herself how to be grounded, connected,
Hmm.
present when she wants to communicate something that maybe she's disappointed in or she's observed in a man or a request. I really think from men to women, from women to men, there's a huge difference in communicating a request or a demand or something that they've seen or outlining a fault in each other. There's a difference between being unregulated and being regulated. So I think a woman has to do her own work in that respect.
Hmm.
Um,
That's a really powerful point. I want to emphasize there. This is very difficult work if you're the only one doing it.
yeah,
I think you see it out in the world as you start doing the work. The people who are and are not doing it,
mm,
and the dynamics in your relationship are going to change as you do this work.
yeah,
And I think both being adjusted to accommodate for that and to make room for the mistakes that are going to happen as you go through this. That's such a wonderful point, Craig. Yeah.
Let's not forget. I mean, even though I've said a woman has to do her work, we in relationship with another, we can't have that expectation. For me, we've got to focus on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And with a man in dynamic with a woman, you can't get around it. If mother is still alive, or whatever women raised the boy, we have to do work in that area.
Mm-hmm.
It's unavoidable. If you're, there's a few guys in my program at the moment, and they've got some challenges with mum. They don't even want to go around to mums sometimes, because mum's like that, and mum's like that, and mum's like that. Blame, 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 blame. But if you are triggered by your mum, you're going to be triggered by your partner. So you've got to do work. One of the greatest things that I ever did, which was actually an encouragement from my last partner, which I'm very grateful for, helped me to realize that in my family dynamic, there was a lot of triangulation happening. What I mean by that is, I'd go to my mum, and my mum would be saying negative things about my brother or his kids, and I'd get in that loop. I'd take sides. I'd go to my brother, and he'd be complaining about my mum, or be complaining about his son, and I'd go into that. I'd go to his son, he's complaining about his dad, and I'd go into that. I'd join forces.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go to his daughter, she's complaining about her brother, and I ended up getting triangulated,
Right.
So what Sarah realised is that I had a lack of boundaries with my mother, because it started from my mother. So I went to my mother and I set a boundary. I said, Mum, I've come here to talk to you. I am not going to accept or get caught in talking about family members. Okay. And then the pattern would, Mum, I'm not getting caught. And I went to have dinner with my brother, and I did the same. And I went to my nephew, and I did the same. And I went to my niece, and I did the same. And it ended my part in the family triangulation. And that was huge, because it helped me to set some boundaries with my intimate partner as well, because I could do it with my mum. But to set a boundary with mum is really scary for men, because mum is this goddess,
Yeah.
and we've been conditioned by little boys that we can't say anything bad about mum. We can't upset mum, especially if she's a patriarchal mum that's quite aggressive and tells you what to do, and places demands on you. It's difficult to say no.
Yeah, for sure. And Craig, I want to be respectful of your time here. So, what are three takeaways that you'd say for men to either begin this work or to continue on their path?
The first piece of advice is, whether it's through a book or a podcast or your own inquiry or a therapist or a group, or just asking questions with certain family members, we do have to make some sense of our past. And we do have to develop forgiveness for whatever happened in our past. Although otherwise, it lives in our unconscious, it sabotages us. We're not able to be present. Our future becomes just like our past. So we have to do our work of making sense of our past. We really, really do. It could even be an online program, but we have to do our investigative work to make sense of our past, of what happened in that past, how has it shaped us, why was our mum actually like that, what could have happened to her, what was my dad's pain, blah, 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 blah. We have to go into that. What are these triggers? How can I kind of have a deeper sense of awareness of the people that trigger me and my part in that? So we can't avoid that. The second part would be cultivate some kind of meditative practice. Now, when I say meditative practice, I'm not talking about formal meditation. That's a component of it. Some kind of practice where we come away from distractions and we're training our attention to be present. It could be meditation. It could be more of a dynamic practice. It could be martial arts. It could be walking. It could be dance. It could be doing something with your partner. It could be tantra. But purposely, it could be ice baths. Purposely practicing something where we have to, by default of that practice, become present and regulate our nervous system. And the third piece of advice for men would be find a men's group. If you don't have one, find a different friend, cultivate a friendship, and be vulnerable with each other, be vulnerable in that group. And if there's any challenges, take it to that group. If there's anything that you want to celebrate, take it to that group, so that within any relationship outside of that group, especially with women, you can be more grounded, connected, and present.
That's beautiful advice, Craig. And
not the 7-year-old boy.
yeah, I've just appreciated your work so much. First of all, watching it from afar, and then directly engaging with you. How can people support your work, and what are ways that people can work with you?
I've got a website, craigwhitementoring.com. There's a YouTube channel, Craig White Mentoring. I've got a podcast called Dare to Be Different. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify, Apple. My Instagram is Craig White Mentoring. You'll find me on LinkedIn as Craig White. What I currently offer is one-to-one programs. I also offer a really thorough one-to-one program that involves 3 days exclusively with me. And what I'm most excited about right now is my Iconic program, which is a 7-month program for male leaders. And I designed that program, and within the program, there's a 10-day retreat in Peru, which you did,
right?
Which is 5 days on retreat, and then the 4-day Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. That's within the 7-month program. The reason I designed a 7-month program is because I used to do one-off retreats, and I realized that men don't need one-off retreats. Men need consistency.
Yeah.
They need consistency. They need intensity, momentum, consistency.
Yeah, that Iconic program that you're referring to there, there's a real magic to it. I think the monthly calls that we had, or every 3 weeks going in, I think it broke down the barriers a little bit. So when we got into the retreat, there was an intensity to it. Yeah. It was hard work, but there was already a connection there. So I think people let the masks go quicker.
Yeah, for sure.
What I don't think I had anticipated is how hard it was coming out of that intensity and back into the real world. Yeah, and that's where the support picked right up afterwards. Yeah. And we continued with that momentum of, don't leave that over here in the retreat. It's a practice. Put this into life. And there's the accountability and the support as we all came out of the other side of that, and we've picked up and carried on going as a group, after the 7-month program.
For sure.
There's a brotherhood there and a connection that in 10 days in person, both in the retreat center at Samadhi, which is just magical, and then in the trek to process all of that, going out to Machu Picchu, where we're working hard, we're hiking, we're eating together, encouraging one another through the difficult phases, and camping together. Yeah, the magic of that and the bond that was built was something that I haven't experienced in the last 20 years of getting to know people. So I would strongly encourage any man who's looking to this work. It's not a weekend away where you jump in a frozen lake and go home. Like, real change takes this kind of support.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Well, Craig, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and can't wait to have you back on to dive deeper into some of these topics.
Me too. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. What a conversation with Craig White on redefining masculinity and the power of men's work. Here are 3 key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, self-awareness is the new power. True leadership begins with knowing who you are, what shaped you, and how you navigate your internal world. Number 2, presence is a daily practice. Cultivating grounded, regulated energy allows men to show up consistently and safely in relationships and in leadership. Number 3, you are not alone. Vulnerability in the company of other men is transformational. Connection dissolves shame and unlocks authentic growth. If today's discussion resonated with you and you're looking for ways to integrate emotional mastery, embodied leadership, and strength-based vitality into your life, we'd love to help. At Vitality Collective, we've built these principles into a comprehensive system to support your health, performance, and relationships. Visit www.vitality-collective.com to learn more and begin your journey towards authentic, grounded leadership. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.